Near the end of the 2 AD year, after almost 7 years living in exile on the island of Rhodes, Tiberius, the son of Livia Drusilla, returned to Rome. And though his new status as merely a praetor dictated he move from his luxurious villa on Carini Hill, which had once belonged to Pompeius Magnus, and take up a more modest residence in the gardens of Maecenas, Livia's son was now at least free of the constant threat of assassination. The unexpected death of Lucius Caesar, grandson of Livia's husband, Caesar Augustus, and the charity of Gaius Caesar, his other heir, had played pivotal roles in securing the end of Tiberius's exile. And though, thanks to Livia's patronage, her son had maintained many allies within the Senate during his absence, the Roman people were an entirely different matter. Tiberius's arrival in Rome had preceded news of the death of Lucius. When that news finally arrived, it was a great shock to the people of Rome. And though Tiberius had written and presented an elegy for his late stepson, many Romans grew suspicious of the timing of recent events. Lucius was dead, and Tiberius was back in the city. But Gaius Caesar was in the east, much too far away to protect his own political position from being wrenched from the hands of his aging grandfather. The people of Rome feared Livia's son was now in a position to displace Gaius and move up to share command of Rome's legions with Livia's husband, Caesar Augustus. Augustus had originally intended for his power as imperator of the legions to be shared with Marcus Agrippa, who had been joined to the family by his marriage to Augustus's daughter, Julia. Waiting in the wings were Livia's sons, Tiberius and Drusus, groomed for promotion should the death of either imperator make it necessary. And below them stood Gaius and Lucius, the adopted successors of Caesar Augustus, and biological sons of Marcus Agrippa, who were styled to eventually succeed Tiberius and Drusus. But unexpected events had rearranged the timeline. In the short span of 3 years, Augustus had lost 2 of his potential imperators, Marcus Agrippa in 12 BC, followed by Livia's youngest son, Drusus, in 9 BC. Both had died prematurely. Tiberius was then promoted to partnership with Livia's husband, granted the tribunician powers by Augustus, and charged with the continued grooming of Gaius and Lucius, even as a third set of candidates was sought from within the youngest generation. But the people of Rome saw things differently. The tribunicia potestas also meant there was nothing to stop Tiberius from abusing that absolute power. Once Caesar Augustus was dead, why wouldn't Tiberius choose his own son as imperator over stepsons Gaius and Lucius? So the Roman people spoke. With the backing of several powerful Roman families allied with Livia's daughter-in-law, Julia, they had successfully elected the 14-year-old Gaius Caesar to the 6 BC consulship, thereby delivering a stinging vote of no confidence to Tiberius, as well as driving him from Rome for 7 years. Then, in February of 4 AD, Gaius Caesar died in the kingdom of Lycia. He had suffered a severe shoulder wound from an assassination attempt 4 months earlier, a wound which failed to heal and eventually claimed his life. Gaius's untimely death reignited the public's mistrust of the Claudians, whom they now suspected of orchestrating the downfall of Gaius's mother and grandmother, Julia and Scribonia. But when Caesar Augustus adopted Tiberius, the protests of the people exploded. They turned their focus to Caesar Augustus's last living grandson, Postumus Agrippa, where they had once succeeded in electing the 14-year-old Gaius to the consulship. They might now repeat that victory with the 15-year-old Postumus and see him fast-tracked on the political path, which led to sharing the office of imperator with his grandfather. This could not be allowed to happen. In 5 AD, the year following Tiberius's adoption, the Lex Valeria Cornelia was proposed by the consuls of the year, Lucius Valerius Messalivolesis and Gnaeus Cornelius Cinemagnus, both of whom were partisans of Livia's son. The purpose of the Lex Valeria Cornelia was to add 10 new voting blocks, known as centuries, to Rome's electoral assemblies. These blocks, 5 each named for Augustus's late grandsons, were made up of Rome's wealthiest and most elite equites from within the Senate, and gave them the right to vote ahead of the general public. The first candidate to reach a majority within these new blocks was declared the winner, and automatically given the support of all 10 blocks. Then, only after the choice of the new centuries was announced, could the public cast its vote. In addition to increased voting power in praetorian and consular elections for the Senate's equestrian elite, new privileges were introduced, which included reserved seating in the Circus Maximus. Thus, the Lex Valeria Cornelia ensured that any ill-disposed attempts on the part of the populace to elect a demagogue to office meant they had to beat the winner of the 10 new voting centuries. And they had to do so with votes that were worth only a fraction of those cast by Rome's senatorial elite. But the people would not be silenced. Pamphlets began to appear before the public, accusing Livia's husband, Augustus, of not only stealing his grandson's inheritance, but of employing adoption to suppress the name of the young man's father. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa Postumus had suddenly become Marcus Julius Caesar. Following a lengthy trial to identify the true perpetrator of this pamphleting campaign of 6 AD, Livia's husband was forced to exonerate the man thought to be the leader. But Livia Drusilla, a patrician Claudian, had connections within Rome's ancient and aristocratic families that were unavailable to her husband, Caesar Augustus. In 6 BC, her son Tiberius had shared his consulship with Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso. Piso was a member of the senatorial elite with whom Tiberius had officially aligned himself on the day he vowed to restore the Temple of Concord. And Piso's wife, Munitia Plancina, was Livia's friend. The aristocratic daughter of Lucius Munatius Plancus and Aemilia Paula, Plancina was a great-granddaughter of Scribonia Libo. Yet Plancina chose not to side with her Aunt Julia and the other angry populists. Ever since Livia's husband had come into power, the renowned and ancient families of Plancina's illustrious heritage had been sidelined to make room for new plebeian families with never-before-heard-of names. Viewing Tiberius as the best chance for a return to sane government, Plancina and her husband, Piso, threw their support behind the Claudians, the only patrician family still on the rise in Rome. By the end of 7 AD, the mysterious identities of the influential men who had taken cover behind the alias of the innocent Publius Plautius Rufus were finally revealed. The leader of the pack was none other than Plancina's uncle, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, the husband of Augustus's granddaughter, Julilla. In 7 AD, soon after Postumus Agrippa legally emancipated himself from his grandfather's family, retaking his biological father's name, Lucius Aemilius Paulus was executed for mistrust. And Augustus's grandson, reduced to a disenfranchised son of the late Marcus Agrippa, was swiftly escorted to the town of Sarentum on the Bay of Naples, where he was placed under heavy guard. However, talk soon began of electing Postumus to the 8 AD consulship in absentia, a fact which did not please Livia's husband. Nor was Postumus behaving. Regular reports were dispatched to Caesar Augustus from his grandson's Sarentum jailers. Postumus Agrippa was reported to have violent outbursts. he had committed mistrust, or treason, by publicly raging at the name of his grandfather for holding him prisoner and stealing his inheritance. Equally treasonous, but more personal, were his accusations against Livia Drusilla. Pronouncing her the proverbial wicked stepmother, Postumus Agrippa laid at the feet of Livia all the calamities that had befallen his family. But the most concerning news to Augustus was the realization that some of the Surrentan guards were discovered to be sympathetic to his grandson's plight. They had frequently allowed Postumus Agrippa to take a rowboat out into the Bay of Naples, positioned so near Misenum's naval port. Following the revelation of a plot to liberate Julia and her mother Scribonia from exile, free Postumus from captivity, and rush them all to the safety of the legions at the naval port of Misenum, Livia's husband acted quickly. The masterminds of the plot were tracked down and executed, while Augustus's grandson was transferred to the more secure island of Planasia, far from any supportive legions at the Portus Julius. Taking even further precautions, Livia's husband then cancelled the 8 AD elections, choosing to appoint all city magistrates for that year. Most of the men chosen to hold public office were supporters and partisans of herself and of her son, Tiberius Julius Caesar. But her husband's granddaughter, the young widow Julilla, still posed a threat. When in 4 AD, Tiberius had been ordered by his stepfather to adopt his nephew, Germanicus, as his primary heir, Livia's husband reinstated the dual postings of his office. It was now Tiberius who served as partner to Caesar Augustus. Livia's grandsons, Germanicus and Drusus, were positioned for grooming and eventual promotion. But for Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the young son of Julilla, Caesar Augustus gave no mark of preference. Quickly working to stitch together the fractured and disparate descendants of the Julian and Claudian families, Augustus had wed his youngest granddaughter, Vipsania Julia, to Livia's grandson, Germanicus. Germanicus's sister, Livilla, was married to Drusus, the son of Tiberius, and Livia's final grandson, Germanicus's younger brother, Claudius, was formally betrothed to marry Julilla's daughter, Aemilia Lepida. When both children came of age, Julilla's husband had been executed at the hands of her grandfather. Her daughter had been promised to the Claudians, the very family she blamed for her family's ruinous downfall, and her son was the biological great-grandson of Caesar Augustus, yet had been treated with disregard. This made Julilla dangerous. Her son was linked to the same populist appeal that had rallied the people around her brothers, Gaius and Lucius, and afterwards around Postumus Agrippa. The Roman people were now sure to throw their support behind Julilla's son, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, yet another child candidate to wield against the influence of the Claudians, whom the public suspected of complicity in the systematic removal of Augustus's natural descendants. But Livia Drusilla and her son, Tiberius Julius Caesar, were already laying the groundwork for a plan to sway the affections and support of the Roman people away from the descendants of Livia's husband, Caesar Augustus, and bring them back to the Claudians.